Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training Japan. And this is our fourth year of the podcast. My special guest today is Dhruv Anand, who is the MD for Japan for Wipro. Anand, welcome.
Morning. Thank you for having me over here.
Yeah. And so how is it that you become the head of Japan? Or what's the backstory on how you got to this position?
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to the audience who will be on your podcast. Clearly, for the last 4 years, I've heard a few, and they've been splendid. So I'm really happy. I'm humbled to be here, and I take the privilege with humility. First of all, I've been here half my living life, which is about 23 years, and 100% of my professional life. I have not seen the likes of Americas or Europe. I've only seen professional life in Japan.
You weren't born growing up here, or you came here as after uni or something? When did you finally get to Japan?
So, being an Indian national, and I'm the son to an army man, somebody who comes in from defense. So we went all over the place in India, like from the north of Ladakh to the south of India, to the east and the west as well. I finished my uni in India as an electronics telecommunications engineer. And interestingly, Wipro was my first ever company. It was the first ever company that came to my college. I was the first ever individual to get picked out of that company, of the college. But the good thing that happened was they sent me to Japan. This was back in 2000.
How long were you in the company before they said off to Japan?
6 months.
Oh, wow. That's pretty quick.
Right. And I must say, the company had something that they saw of individuals who want to be outside of the country and become brand ambassadors, not just for the company, but for the country and the culture. And I believe they saw something in me. And after 6 months, they said, scoot to Japan. Wow. And I was in Narita International Airport.
Unbelievable. And so the operation had been running in Japan for how long before then?
We started off in 1998, which means it was about 3 years, three and a half years. Solid business. We had extremely good grounded business, but clearly it needed more expansion. It needed more young engineers, young people coming here and growing the economy along with the Indian economy as it was, moving in the IT industry back in early 2000s.
So in your early roles, you would have been working as an engineer, I guess?
That is correct.
Had you done, right?
Yeah.
And so presumably you would have been probably early 20s at that time. So
22.
22, right? Okay. So you're working in your profession and gradually working your way up, I guess, within the company. At what point did you actually get given the role of supervision or leadership for taking care of other engineers or other staff?
Actually, that's a very good question. And I think that is extreme key to where Japan economy stands today and the Japanese professionals stand today. So just to give a little bit of color to it, Greg, I started off in 2001, came into Narita, rode the Shinkansen, and mark you my word, that was my first ever bullet train in life. And the quality was perfect. It came on time, it left on time. It was just spick and span, perfect. So those were solid years. Those were years that were really building me up. Coming to your question, I went to Mishima. It's a small town in Japan. Now, it's a town where foreign nationals are very few.
This is in Shizuoka.
This is in Shizuoka Prefecture. That's the place of the Fuji-san, the Fuji mountain, right? But I was in this extremely small town. And just by the way, we come in from an IT background, but in Japan, a lot of IT happens in the factories. So see, you don't sit in a nice business class office, but you sit in a factory. Now, that's mind-blowing. I did that for about 3 years. And as you may know the Indian culture, and if you've seen the Indian traffic, you see at the Indian traffic, at least back in 1990s, everyone would be at the signal. You don't align one behind the other. Everybody stands together. What I'm trying to tell you that is because in the Indian culture, finding a way is the natural DNA. And hence, grooming an employee is a task of the company, but also grooming yourself and finding your own path is something that is expected from you. Or from that one person. Call it this way. Good CEOs of huge multinationals of America are Indians today. There are other nationalities, of course. But one thing that clearly comes to an Indian CEO, MD, is we are used to be standing at a signal and being absolutely aware of 360 degrees of what may come our way. Expect the unexpected. And therefore you have to act accordingly. So coming back to your question, I think I took about 3.5 years, 4 years of being assigned as a manager to 4-5 people. And therefore...
Now, these were Japanese staff or Indian staff? Or?
It was a hybrid staff. So
hybrid,
it was a tough one. It was Indian staff, and therefore you know culturally how to handle those professionals. And then there was Japanese staff with extremely different cultural upbringing, extremely different backgrounds, extremely different educational backgrounds.
Well, let's explore that a little bit. Let's continue with the differences. What was, you've had the Indian culture, Indian staff, you understand them, and the Japanese staff. What things did you notice? Well, this is not what I expected. You expect the unexpected, of course, but this is a bit different to what I've seen happen in India. What was unusual for you?
It was extremely interesting. And I think where I am today is because of these learnings and educations that I discovered very early on in my profession. Just to name a few. And I gave you the example of traffic. Now, you look at a youngster in Japan. What they see from a very young age is the traffic is controlled, it's orderly, and moves in a particular fashion. And you don't break that order. In India, on the other hand, at least back in 2000s, the traffic was very disorderly, which means you have to find the right way through. It's true for professionals as well. Now, culturally different, let's say Indian professionals, you give them a problem statement, and that's all that you give them. You don't tell them how to discover it and how to reach a solution. And you can do that once, but if you do that the second time, it's the subordinate who will come back and tell you there's another way to do it, there's a better way to do it, and there's a completely different way to do it. What I learned with Japanese subordinates was you had to give them a way to do it. Not one time, not 2 times, but a lot of times. It means they were used to defined norms, defined instructions, and defined ways of working.
I always thought that, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm talking completely out of school here. I always thought that engineers were very curious people, that they love problem solving. And a lot of the times I've heard one of the difficulties of retaining engineers is if you didn't have complex enough problems to really make them curious and interested, they'd quit, So, interesting you're talking about they want something given to them. Okay, this is how you're going to do it. Follow this path, do this. But I'm just wondering, how does that gel with this sort of engineer curiosity and a desire to come up with the better plan, come up with an alternative, even in Japan, I'm wondering.
Well, achieving something is a goal. That's a destination. I'm talking more about the path to the destination. Are you willing to take the same path to the destination, or are you willing to explore a little bit? Now, where I believe, and this is my personal opinion, is this is very deep-rooted in the culture. It is extremely deep-rooted back in the samurai culture. Making a mistake was never forgiven. In the rest of the world, making a mistake is you fall 7 times, you stand up the 8th time. It's true in Japan. But making a mistake in the corporate world in Japan, and you and I have seen it, you've been here longer than me. When you make a mistake in the corporate world, responsibility is that of the individual, largely. I think those are things that, pardon me for my word, defeats the curiosity of the engineer. Engineers need to be explored. Look at it this way, if I may put it. Back in 2000s, you had the products of Sony. You had the products of Toshiba. You had brilliant products coming out. And then suddenly came in not the rotary phones and not those Nokias, but an Apple iPhone or a Samsung iPhone. Now, these are products which are the same. They have the same GSM chip. They have the same software, but it is more innovational. They've achieved what people identify with. Services sell products. Products don't sell themselves anymore. Therefore, to be able to have that innovation, you need to be extremely biased for action, move quick, make mistakes, learn from them, course correct, get back on track.
Which is the total antithesis of tell me what I should do.
Exactly.
So as a leader, though, how did you handle that? Did you say to yourself, you're an engineer, you're working here like the rest of us, why are you asking me how to get to the end product goal here? That's your talent, that's your skill, that's your training, that's your education. So don't ask me for instructions, come up with a goal achievement. Is that the approach you took, or did you think, oh my God, I've got to plot this out step by step for these people? How did it go?
It clearly wasn't an easy one, but what really helped me was what I'd learned with my father taught me. He was a squash player, and so am I. And he told me, Dhruv, if you want to play squash, expect the unexpected. The partner is going to have a shot which you've never imagined, and you have to be ready for it. There's also a saying both you and I know in Japanese, go niru, go nishitagai. Do in Rome as Romans do. I did not want to take a complete out-of-the-box approach. For subordinates to sign up on a leader, they have to find reasons to identify. They have to feel one with you, and they have to trust you. And trust more is something that comes from the limbic mind. It's like saying, why do I love my wife? She's beautiful. She's always there for me. She makes sure I'm happy. But all I'm doing is just advocating. The limbic mind cannot put language to the trust, the feelings. I try to appeal to the limbic mind. Call it my education. I was reutilizing my education through the years of how do you make people trust? How do you make subordinates, peers, colleagues, leaders trust what you believe in? Some of the things that I used, for an initial period, I did give them a few instructions. And somebody taught me this. The next question when I gave them a particular task, I asked them, hey, listen, I've given you something. Can you do also come back and tell me how I could have given you a better task better? And in that wake of doing so, they started thinking for themselves. 6 months, I had better approaches than I'd even thought of. I suddenly saw light at the end of the tunnel. The other thing that I really found interesting was, and in Japan, Japanese people like working in a hybrid environment. They like seeing cultures. And I took a very conscious decision to have a hybrid, diverse as we call it today, nationality and gender. And I built teams which had the other gender, the female gender, the male gender, Indians,
There have been too many female engineers, I would have thought, given that most of the engineers produced in Japan are male. So you're lucky to find some women who are engineers.
I took the liberty of flying them from India.
Indian engineers.
It's a means to an end.
Right.
And this is where I found, again, something which, again, for the love of this particular company, I personally went through a program called Shimpo. Shimpo, as you call in Japanese, is progression. And this is a program of language and culture immersion. I took it for 6 months while being on the payroll of the company. I found myself absolute advocate of the beauty the culture has, the Japanese culture has. I also made it a point to become an ambassador for that program of Wipro and have young graduates who join us go directly to Shimpo to get immersed into the culture. And those were, again, ambassadors who would come and become. So I gave them a reason. I gave them a why. You enter a Shimpo program. Why? Because you can be in Japan. Because you can learn a different culture, which is very close to the Indian culture, but also has subtle differences.
The Shimpo instruction was done here or done in India?
It's done in India.
Done in India.
It's done in India. It's done in an environment which is completely immersed in the Japanese culture. There are Japanese sensei, teachers who fly in. The room is a Japanese room. And you start on day one, time t equal to 0 with Japanese. There's no English in the room. So you're already immersed.
Total immersion.
Absolute immersion.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
It does. So the sensei would come in and say, konnichiwa, and start speaking Japanese, and everyone's looking, what's happening?
Yeah, it sounds like when I was trying to learn Italian, it was a bit like that. But coming back to leadership, though, in terms of, you saw the Japanese engineers, I'm talking about now, when given the freedom to come up with alternatives, come up with different angles, coming up with things you never expected that are better than you anticipated. So obviously they had the latent capacity, ability was there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, as you're describing, maybe for a lot of Japanese companies, because of the hierarchy and age and stage, etc., expectations that you'll just follow, the standard path, that maybe they're not tapping into that capacity very much.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's changing. And I think you mentioned something. There is a very democratic way of decision making, the ringi system in Japan. Everyone has to agree for a particular decision to be passed. It's a good thing. But what happens that way is accountability gets completely gone under the carpet because you don't know.
We're all accountable, so
but no one is
personally accountable, right?
Which is very different from the Western world, if you look at it.
Yeah.
There is always somebody accountable and somebody's neck is on the line, which is not a good thing or a bad thing. But who do you have to ask and why? It's a good thing because you do combined decision making, but in the wake of doing so, you completely, for the want of a better word, hamper curiosity, leadership, wanting to explore the unexplored, and being able to voice what you don't think is right because of the democratic process.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So, when you've got a small group and you start leading, that's one challenge. But I'm presuming at some point, you work your way up through the company.
That is correct.
And then you start to get to a much bigger responsibility with much larger numbers. So, a couple of engineers, Mishima, that's one thing. But then you've got, lots of people.
Yeah.
At what point did you get to, like, the numbers start to get substantial and the leadership challenge changed?
I was with Wipro till about 2007. And this is when I was leading about 100 odd people.
Okay. So you went from a small number to a big number pretty quickly in just 6 years.
In 6 years, yes.
Yeah.
And I have none else to thank other than the company. They were willing to take the risk on me. And they were allowing me to make mistakes. So growth happens when you're really dealing with risk factor. So in 6-7 years, I was dealing with 100 people. I was running an entire program. This included Japanese nationals. This included Indians sitting out of India, Bangalore and Chennai, and also a few sitting out of Vietnam. It was a multi-diverse, multi-geo, multi-location.
And time zone too.
And time zones too. And therefore it provided its own challenges. And I think I used that environment. I used the environment and learnings from sports to really know how to get teams to excel, how to get teams to back each other up.
So how did you do that?
I followed this principle and I don't remember where I read it. But I think great organizations in this world do it. I call it the 3 concentric circles. I don't know if you've read this one. It's the why, how, and what. And I believe...
It's probably Simon Sinek's video on that.
That's the one. That's the one. I think I remember reading it and I've always identified. It's the why that gets people together rather than the how or the what. As long as you're able to reach out to their limbic mind, as I think he also said the same thing of why, then there is identification, and then there are teams that build up, that sign up on each other. So it's a conscious way of approaching to that particular part of the mind. Why do we do this?
And is the why aspect of it different if you're giving a why to Vietnamese engineer, Indian engineer, Japanese engineer, or is it just a common why? Did you actually have variations on that around the why, or no?
I couldn't agree more. There are variations to it.
There were variations. So the why for a Japanese and the why for an Indian engineer, Vietnamese engineer would be different. And what was different?
So let me give you a live example. I come from a very small town in India. I come with...
is there such a thing as a small town in India?
There is.
1.4 billion people or something like that.
So, well, at least back in 2000, it was extremely small. And luckily, modernization and things have still not hit the city. We still work with sometimes broken roads, two-wheelers, and still people sitting by the side of the street selling fruits and vegetables. I came from a very small town. The beginning was very humble, to be honest. And therefore, one of the things that really led me to want to explore outside of India was how was I going to make my economic state better? It's an end goal, I'll be honest. at certain point of time in 20s, you do think about your own economic status, and therefore you want to be better off. Missions, of course, change as you move. Now, if you ask me, is my economic state of affairs something that I think about every day? No. Back then, yes.
Maslow's hierarchy of moving up the scale, right?
And at a certain point of time, it just ceases to make sense. But at that point of time, it did. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm one of them, I have to be humble enough to imagine that there are others like me. Mm-hmm. And I think somebody else also said it. Sometimes you see people with tattoos and they're of brands. I think it was Simon again who said it, or was it somebody else who said it? But people identify with things. Mm. And it's like the national flag. Mm. We all identify with the national flag. And if somebody was to do damage to it, it just hurts our feeling, but it's just a flag.
Interestingly, though, often when I talk to companies who are trying to inspire a stronger purpose, greater commitment, they do the motivation element through money. And they often tell me that in Japan, it's not very effective. They offer more money, but people don't seem to be very interested in having more money. They've got other things that they're more interested in. So I'm just wondering, when you talk about appealing to the why of the Japanese engineers compared to the others, what was different? What was the more common motivating thing for them, maybe compared to other nationalities?
I've had friends, I've had acquaintances back from 2001, and they've remained with me. In fact, some of them even work with me in the same company today. They've chosen to take the risk on me. I think I appealed them in one simple way, which was I chose to get closer to them and their families. I made them identify with who I am, not because of what I look or what I speak, but what I believe in. And at the end of the day, I did realize, and I can name a few friends who I found were believing and wanting to walk the same journey, or already were walking the same journey. It just needed to be a little bit patient, right? And food is always a great thing. You know Japan.
Especially in this country, yeah.
Absolutely. And the culture has it, like the hara, the stomach, is extremely important. The samurais used to cut it open. There's haramaki, there's harakiri. Even the language, when you get angry, it says haraga tatteru. Stomach is very important. So appealing to one's stomach, call it street smart or call it the way that I learned, was an extremely nice way of getting to know somebody and them opening the door to Japanese personal lives. Now, I'm sure you've seen this. Not many Japanese people would like to invite you to their houses. It's a personal place. But if you're able to open that door and you're able to make a foot inside that door, you've appealed to the heart of the person rather than the mind of the person. And I chose that to be. And at that point of time, Indian curry, for example, was famous. It still is. But it is different from what you get in the stores to what an Indian makes it. It was a very simple way to approach the hearts of the person through their stomachs.
I hope you toned down the spices a bit for the Japanese palate.
Well, that's a conversation for another day. But I use simple tools of life, of how we human beings connect, to really build teams together and appeal to them. I can cite this example for you where I told 3 of my subordinates that if you're able to come up with just what I told you, a new way of doing things in the next 3 weeks, I will make good lunch for you for next 2 days of the week and you will enjoy. You will not have to go to a convenience store. I will seat you and treat you to an Indian nice lunch. They did what they needed to do and I did what I needed to do. It was just a give and take.
Very good. So you're actually good in the kitchen as well. That's good to know.
I try not using the skills anymore. They're rusty.
So you're talking actually there about engaging people. And we'll come back to that. But as I recall, you told me you left Wipro for a while and went outside and then came back. Is that my...
That is absolutely correct.
Memory is correct?
Yeah.
So... around, was it 2007, was it? You said?
2008, I went out of Wipro.
And where did you go?
I went to Tata Consultancy Services.
Tata, here in Japan?
Here in Japan, the Indian heritage company.
So you come into Tata and you've got a new group of people. Undoubtedly, you're coming in at a high level. I'm not sure, what level did you come in at?
I came in as a vertical head. You call it a business unit head.
Like a division head or something?
Like a division head, yeah.
So they're already there. You turn up. You're now the boss. How did you go about getting them behind you to support what you're doing? How did you set direction or strategy or ethos or all those sorts of things with a completely new group of people, but a group of people who've been doing the same thing
Yeah.
in the same way for quite some time, which is established way. So how did you approach that?
I think it's easier to do business than to build teams, personally. It's always easier to do business. At the end of the day, business is all about people. So if you're good with people, business will be good.
Isn't building teams about people too?
It is, absolutely. People are at the heart of everything. You call a pyramid. It's people again. I think I use my skills. And one thing that I consciously do is set myself on uneven ground. It helps me to learn a lot more. Sometimes I falter, but then I go look back at that falter and look back at what trainings do I need to get? What learnings do I need to do? It's about reading books. It's about speaking to people. It's about getting coaching. And it's all out there. It's just a matter of reaching out. So when I reached TCS, and it's an Indian heritage company again, it had been in Japan for, if not the same period of time, about the same period of time, same set of problems. However, it was again built with people who were here. One thing that I learned there, and it's my mantra or secret as I call it, is I built around myself people who could identify with me and me with them. What I mean by that is, and I'll give you a personal insight here, is I'm married to a Japanese. I did build a team that was not only diverse in terms of nationality, but also had long-term reasons to stay in Japan because of family. And lucky I found a lot. Then it came for us building on that common ground, identifying with each other and identifying what we see in Japanese culture, because we see it at home, and utilizing it at office. Now, I don't know if you've seen this, but I'm sure you agree, diversity in Japan could be better.
It's not particularly diverse.
Yes.
Yeah. But on that point, though, did that establish a type of two-tier alignment in the team? For example, the lifers, I'll call them. We're here, we're married into the culture, we've got in-laws, we've got family here, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then we've got other people who are transient or maybe don't have that same situation. So you've now got two
sets of people.
Two sets of people.
That
now,
is true.
Did the people who are not married into the culture and not staying here forever feel, oh, okay, Dhruv he's giving these people curry, for example. I'm making this up now. But we're not getting any curry over here, because he favours those people because he's one of them. And we are just here for a couple of years, he's going to work us hard and then we leave. Is there that danger of having a sort of two-phase thing going on there?
It was obviously there. Well, it was consciously there. And I rolled back to the three concentric circles, the why. Why would an Indian family who doesn't speak the language, let's say, stay back in Japan? Either they like the place a lot, or they found comfort around their neighborhood, people to identify with, or they found somebody who enables the two, and therefore them living here makes more sense. I used this consciously built environment that I had to also be a conduit for the young families who were coming in to get identified to the land, to feel one with the land, to be able to have somebody like me who speaks Hindi, English, but also have a part of my family who can always work with them, identify with them on how do you work around in Japan? How do you make your life more livable in Japan? It's as simple as going to a hospital and sometimes not being able to speak Japanese. And they try very hard, but there are obvious barriers. But here you find somebody who's your leader, but is also willing to work with you and go to a hospital and can ask his better half to say, can you just help them? So it was, again, building people together, not within of office, but outside of office. And just getting people to be together, building a community. And with the likes of that community was the glue logic for me. It's always been my glue logic to have the whys come together and answer their whys. And therefore.
So Tata was how many years at Tata?
I was about 14 years there.
14 years.
14
right?
years.
Double the period you had with
Absolutely.
And then you came back here?
I've come back to Wipro again.
So how long have you been back now?
Now, it's been this month exactly a year.
A year, okay.
It's been exactly a year.
So, okay. So that was interesting, you're here, then you leave for 14 years, you come back again. I'm sure a lot of the people you were working with previously are still here.
Are still here.
Given Japan, there's not much mobility here. So that must have been, you came back as the boss this time.
That is true.
Right. So that must be interesting because there must have been people who were senior to you when you were working here who are now junior to you.
Yeah.
So how's that going in terms of exploring the why with them and the motivation for them,
Yeah. Just to give you a quick background, a lot of people have asked me over the last 1 year, why did you come back to Wipro? You're doing very well. And I keep going back to the why. Back then, I didn't know Wipro that much. I was young. I was more into doing my own thing. And when I was outside and I looked inside of Wipro, I realized that there's a lot happening that I didn't notice. One of the things, and I could go on and on about this, I don't know if you know, and I don't know if your audience knows, but Wipro as an enterprise was started by the Premjis, the founders, they're the chairmen. Second only to Bill Gates Foundation is the Azim Premji Foundation in terms of philanthropy and corporate social responsibility. I think our chairman has set us out on a why, that when we do business, 66% of that business goes to philanthropy. That's why we do business. That's why...
It's a huge proportion.
It's a huge proportion. If I put a few numbers to it, it's about a few billions last year of a profit. He's given us a why, or the chairman has given us a why. And
so
that why...
do you get to choose where it goes yourselves, or the central organisation takes the 66% and then they make those decisions and disperse it?
So there is a well-defined organisation that does this. And I think it's best that way because they have responsibility for it. But what stitches us, that team and the entire rest of the Wipro together, is we do this because of every 100 yens, we want to send 66 yens out there for our corporate social responsibility. I'm privileged today that I've brought, we call it Wipro Cares. I brought Wipro Cares to Japan. And when I joined, they asked me, what do you want to do in Japan? The first thing on my mind was to work with the other gender, find out how they can become more adaptable to a working environment in Japan, because clearly there's a task force. Clearly, and I see it in my family, clearly there's a task force that's available, very smart, extremely sharp, and very quick in decisions. If there's something that I can do to just give it a catalyst, I think my why is answered.
Coming back to why, if I'm a Japanese worker inside Wipro and I see this philanthropic idea on the part of the family who own the company, and 66% of the profit is going to these different things, but I'm not in any part in control of where that money goes or how that money is spent, but I'm Japanese, I'm living here. So normally corporate social responsibility has some connectivity with the workers in that environment.
Absolutely.
And the activity. So for example, 1 in 7 children here in single mother homes are growing up in poverty.
That is correct.
Incredible that would be the case, but it's a reality. So for example, some corporate social responsibility may be for that particular group, or there may be, as you say, things to help women advance in education and work, to have a better diversity balance in the society, or it may be for taking care of older people who maybe don't have the finances enough, or such. There's many corporate social responsibility activities available in this country, but if I'm a worker in the company and I see the 66% going outside of Japan, do I really think the CSR has got any value?
And that's a great point of view. I couldn't agree more to it. And hence, from the day that I've joined, my responsibility has been to ensure that profits that we do in Japan get cycled back into Japan.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, and I'll tell you the why again. I told you about the ringi, the ringi process, or the democratic way of approaching. Now I'll give you a lifetime example. My wife works 3 days a week. Sadly, she also has to take care, because we don't have helpers at home. You don't have those in Japan, clearly. She's got to take care of 2 kids, 5 and 7 respectively. And they're a handful. And then they have a lot of things: swimming, running, soccer, piano. I've seen the women task force in Japan to be quick decision makers, because they have limited amount of time to quickly make that decision and still go to work and come back and still making sure that everything's in place, which is completely contradictory to what you see in the corporates. Hence, clearly, to be able to change the beautiful way Japan works today and to give it a new color, you need this particular task force and use their natural skills to come into the system. If I quote a few numbers, I think it's only about 13% of women task force, about 7% of women task force on boards of companies, whereas in the Western world, it's double digits, anything the north of 20-25%. So clearly, I had to channel it back into Japan. And today I speak with the likes of Jetro and others. And it's a tough problem. There's no solution to it. But I think we are on the right journey to give it back into Japan and get.
Okay. So you've been Wipro, Tata, Wipro again, a year in the job here. Over the course of your entire working career in Japan, which is by itself fascinating, and you mentioned some things about that personalization of having, going to people's homes, into your home presumably, having that connection around getting engagement with people. So apart from that, what other things have you found have worked well to get people engaged in Japan?
On a more professional front, and I'll give you two flavors to it. On the professional front, and I'm sure you'll identify on this fact. I forget the Japanese word for it, but fresh graduates, they come into a company and then they retire from the same company.
Oh, yeah, that's...
Shush, I forget the word, so I don't want to...
Yes, I should know that. It's the Dainishi Sotsu.
Right, that's the one.
So it's the second graduation. So it means you graduate
out of
from university and you join the company, and 3 or 4 years later you graduate from the company and you go to some other company. So Dainishi Sotsu is the name.
Right. And what I found is Japanese nationals, Japanese people are extremely curious people. They are curious. But like the culture has it, the honne, which is telling reality, and the tatemai, which is
superficial reality.
Superficial. Yeah. In the corporate world, everybody lives potentially in the tatemai domain center. So there is a lot of people.
And why is that?
I think it's ingrained in the culture, and the Zen has it, that you do not have conflict at office. You think 2 times before you say something, and therefore you come across as a more rounded individual versus coming as a pointed individual who could just make an opinion straightforward. And those are traits. Look at CEOs of the West. They are flamboyant, charismatic, outspoken. You don't see that in Japan. Those are frowned traits in Japan. And therefore it's embedded into the culture. Now, can we change it tomorrow? Clearly that's not happening. And hence there's a lot of tatemai, that you have to speak what needs to be heard versus speak what you think. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. It's anyone's guess.
Well, I mean, that Ringi Sato system we talked about before of decision-making, bottom-up decision-making, a lot of discussions are going on privately, individually.
Yes.
And we're sort of nudging the decision along till we get to a meeting room like this and we make the formal rubber stamp of something that's we've already decided, previously. It's a different way of doing it. I mean, I think there's a lot of value in that too. There's a lot of things that work in that. So the tatemai is again another part of social harmonization, I guess, to keep the fabric of the group together. So so what does this mean for engagement of people?
So in the professional world, I've found that the tatemai covers over somebody's right to come and say, I need to learn more. I'm not ready for this job. But it is expected that you're ready, but you're really not ready. To open that box and allow them to come out and say, I think I need to train. I think I'm not ready for this. I think I need to spend some more time on the whiteboard and somebody needs to help me, is not a process that happens officially. One of the customers that I worked for, I can't name them, was it February the 15th of February, the 16th was called the Black Day. What that means is they shuffle the entire task force. You were in Department A at one point of time and you'll go to an absolutely different department on 17th of February. And from there till March 31st, you learn the work, on-the-job training. But on-the-job training for 30 days is never enough because then you're going to be validated from 1st of April to the next 15th of February, if I may say so. Very little time to hone yourself, very little time to look at yourself in the mirror and say, am I ready for this? I found as long as you provide that platform to engineers, to corporate individuals, they're willing to learn. And when they're willing to learn is when they become great leaders. So in the journey that I have been, I've started doing personnel exchange. I do make it a point to send my task force to India and spend 6 months there. 6 months to learn the fact that you have to be on your toes to learn new things to be able to be more apt 6 months down the line. In my world, in the IT world, you call it upskilling, cross-skilling, is something that I pay a lot of attention to because clearly work is evolving, technology is evolving, and keeping up with technology is not easy. It is just not easy. And knowing the demographics of Japan, it's all the more not easy because the population is dwindling at this point of time. Hence, you have to find levers to cross-train upskill people. And I find faith in doing this.
So one of the, we mentioned this before about money not being a particularly big successful motivator in many companies here. Another big problem is companies tell me that they see people with potential and they want to promote them. But when they bridge the subject of taking on this new role, the staff member says, no, I'm not ready yet. It's too early. I can't do it. Which, in a Western, way of thinking is like, what? Why wouldn't you take the job? But again, this thing about I have to be, I guess, make no mistakes, be very good in what I'm going to be doing. I have to be really ready. So, how do you get around that to engage people to try and believe more themselves, to put their hand up? Or that rotation you talked about before in mid-February is a rotation that the HR department has got the war map out there. Okay, Dhruv goes from here to here and Greg goes from here to here, and that just happens. That's not you putting your hand up and saying, I want to go and work X factory or X location or X job. You're told where to go. That's a bit different to actually being offered a promotion and saying no. So what have you found works well to get people engaged to believe in themselves a bit more and step up and take on what is obviously riskier than being in the current job, which you know perfectly, to try and do something a bit more difficult?
I'd go back to a saying, birds of a feather flock together, which is a good thing. And therefore, I pay very keen attention through the year of making people identify themselves to somebody. Grooming them. Now, giving a life example, if you're walking the street of Japan, and you must have noticed this, a lot of people will carry the same wallet. Identification. Don't do the thing otherwise. So I spend a lot of time with my employees. First of all, I spend a lot of time with my employees. 80% of my time doesn't go being on a PC or a handheld device, but speaking to people. Understanding.
Counterintuitive for a high-tech company.
But it's all about the people.
It's all about the people.
And exactly. If you don't know what they're timid of, and if you don't know what they're best at, then you're not being a just leader to them. Because clearly, as a leader, it is imbibed upon me to give them a path to be successful. And as somebody said it, I think it was Steve Jobs who said it, leadership is about making people do things they didn't think they could do. I think it was Steve Jobs who said it, if I quote him correctly.
If it didn't, doesn't matter. It's a really good quote anyway.
And so if you speak to people, you really realize, to employees, as to what they really want to do and what limits them to do things. And then what I also follow is what in the IT world you follow as rapid coding. What rapid coding is, I will code, I will write the source code, but I'll also have somebody sitting behind me who overlooks the code. And when I don't know, because he's following the code, he will give me a piece of advice. And thus, by far, you will have a better output because 4 eyes are looking at it and 2 minds are working on it. I ensure that we follow a mentor-mentee mentality very closely, one. But what I also do is I ensure that same nationalities don't stick together. Because you have to think differently. The same source code or the same concept could mean 2 different things for different people, but the outcome is the same. So I pay keen attention to those things. Now, when I came into this, in this company, I was tasked by my supervisor saying, Dhruv, you've got to make a particular vertical extremely successful. Let's call it the automotive vertical. Now, the automotive vertical, as we all know, is a huge pyramid of the OEM, the car makers, the tier ones, the technology, system integrators, and then software providers. I've paid conscious attention to picking one from each of my partner companies. Therefore, what I have today is somebody comes in from an OEM, Hondas, Mazdas, Nissans, Toyotas. Somebody comes in from a tier one, Densos or Valeo or Calsonic Kansai. Somebody comes in from a consulting company, and then somebody also comes in from the likes of system integrators. When these 4 people come together and challenge each other's thoughts, they realize they have different dimensions of talking exactly of the same outcome. And therefore magic happens, in my belief. And today, therefore, I see somebody who came in from a consulting domain understands better the automotive domain from a manufacturing standpoint. It's about sharing information. And it's about sharing the same 360 degrees, a particular pie with somebody else, and sharing what they don't have. It goes back to the limbic mind. Why do you like your wife? Because she completes me. Well, it's not that she's more beautiful and I don't look beautiful. So if you coalesce the 2 pictures, I look beautiful. It's just appealing to the limbic mind versus anything else, in my opinion, that is.
Well, you mentioned rapid coding. You mentioned people from specific backgrounds and bringing them together to have more, I guess, leverage over problem solving. What things, apart from that, what things have you found have worked well to encourage people to come up with ideas and from their side? Because often as leaders, we have a lot of experience, we get a lot of access to information that maybe they don't get because we're at the top of the pyramid. So we often have a lot of ideas and we start driving with our ideas. But what about getting the ideas from the bottom? So over the period of time you've been with the two companies in Japan, what things have you worked out well for you to get people to come up with ideas?
Wipro is a global company, and I'll speak from Wipro's standpoint. We are present in Japan. We are also present in 65 other countries, overall 66. One conscious thing and religious thing that I also do is pick up somebody who's in the front line of, let's say, Americas or Europe or India, and come and speak to the team. What you're getting there for is a team that clearly has a way of doing things, but also hearing the same thing being done a little differently in a totally different environment with a totally different mindset and mind share. And therefore hints come from there. And it works, it's a symbiotic relation. The speaker also understands what sells, let's say in Japan, what works in Japan, and finds that to be extremely usable in their geography. Comes back again to people. The more you make people interact, the more magic happens. And that's where leadership really lies. You're in a forest and you don't know how to go. Who's going to take the lead? Somebody picks their hands up saying, I'll take the lead. And by and large, it's expected. Therefore, you know how to do it. But a great leader would say, okay, I don't know how to do it. I'm willing to lead. But clearly, you have to tell me who can cut the wood, or who knows how to swim across the river, or who knows how to do certain things else. That's the leadership quality that I look for within the teams to really work together. And then
That's
make them
leadership
interact.
quality, but I'm thinking about the ideation, creativity. Have you come up with across any methodologies or tools that work well to get people to come up with original ideas?
Oh, yes, clearly. I think innovation is a good word, but does innovation really happen often? Maybe no. Adding a new feature to the phone is not innovation. If you've been to the convenience store, having white Coca-Cola is not innovation. It's just a way of selling the product, that's it. However, coming up with something that is original and authentic is innovation. And therefore, I think every leader and every employee needs to take the time out, switch off from work, just sit and think of ideas. How I've seen that work is when you throw a problem at a team, you completely keep them away from work on a Saturday, Sunday. You take them for a game of cricket, which my team plays. I also have somebody from the Japan national team who's a part of my team. It's a good experience. It takes their minds away. And just by the way, to have some fun, when we all get together after the match, throw them with a business problem. Listen, I'm struggling with this customer. Clearly what we're doing is not working. Can I have some more innovative ideas? And people have come up with great ideas. So I give them a different environment with a problem statement, which they can identify with and then ask. There's another way of doing it in a meeting room. There's another way of professionally doing it. But I think the mind works better when you're more free. I know I was with a customer 2 days ago, an esteemed customer, and we were wining and dining. But the things that we spoke about were not business, but camping.
Camping, okay.
Camping. He told me he goes to Fuji-san. I said, what kind of camps do you use? And then I asked him a question. I'm struggling to understand which part of the business do I really become more viable for you as a trusted partner? And he opened up saying, this is my problem. I think I can solve it. Can you come back to me in 2 weeks and tell me how we can solve it? Now I'm going to come back to my team and give them another environment, let's say for barbecue. I don't know, give them an open space and ask them to think of the problem. And I'm confident something nice will come out of it, or at least we tried. So I use a little indirect means, not so professional, a little bit more human connection, human-centric way of reaching out innovation.
Okay. And you talked before about building trust.
Yeah.
Can we talk more about that? What things have you found works well in Japan to build trust?
On a lighter note, the stomach. People who you can sit, eat with are people you can go a very long way together.
So are you lunching 5 days a week with the team? Are you, having dinners a few times every week with the team? Are you having breakfast with the team? How is that working? How are you approaching that?
There's a clear distinction that exists between, and again, I've learned this from an Indian heritage company. Indian heritage companies, you will have Shokudo in India. You'll have huge canteens. Now, enterprises have gone to the extent of having North Indian food, South Indian food, West Indian food. It's a way of bringing people together. In Japan, I have seen people go to the convenience store, pick up their lunch boxes and a nice bottle of water and sit on their desks and eat. It's a good break to have, and people also sleep during the lunch break. But I think it's more refreshing when you come on a table around like this, open up your tiffins, goes back to school days, but that's when the nice conversations happen. That's when you eat from each other's tiffins. As adults, there's nothing wrong in doing so, but you're also exchanging ideas on the table. To answer your question, I do make it a point that at office, from 12 to 1, everyone has a lunch break.
Together.
But not on their benches, not on their seats. So I've built a place in the office where people come and eat lunch.
Are you putting in a big shokudo in the new refurbished office that you're working on?
I intend to do it, but it's a tough one. But what I do insist to do is everyone comes down and sits together. Sometimes they bring it from a convenience store. Some Indians still carry tiffins from home and lunch boxes from home. Even Japanese people do. It's a nice way of connecting. It's a nice way of interacting.
And you're sitting out there eating as well?
Absolutely. I'm more often than not, I'm the first one to say, come on, boys, let's go. Come on, team, let's go. It's lunchtime. And I make it a point sometimes not to carry my lunchbox because then I tell others also sometimes just don't carry a lunchbox. It's all about sharing. What we have should be a means to filling our stomachs. So everybody carries sometimes, and sometimes intentionally people don't carry because they just want to enjoy different meals. It's just those small ways of bringing people together.
So apart from sort of those who eat together, work well together, as a philosophy, any other things you found works well as a leader to build trust with the team?
Appreciating their point of view. Unfortunately, if I may say so, making mistakes in Japan is sometimes not acceptable.
And it's never acceptable in Japan, in my experience. This is a no defect, no mistake culture here.
Absolutely. And it's a great culture to be.
That's why that Shinkansen you talked about before leaves right on time and arrives right on time.
Absolutely. I do remember there was this case that a train was a minute late and they sent out a public apology. These are fantastic disciplines to have. But at the end of the day, someone said it, to err is human. I tell my teams on regular basis, make mistakes. I, as a leader, will not take disciplinary action because he made a mistake. All I want to know is, what did he learn out of it? And how can you, in Japan, there's this word called yoko tenkai. You spread information horizontally. Ensure that whatever mistakes you make, which you should make, but also ensure that others know about what you did so that they can learn from it. And please don't be embarrassed about it. Making mistake is a function of you trying. If you don't make mistakes, it means you're not trying. But if you're trying and not making mistakes, then you're clearly not trying your best. So I have sessions. I have all hands meeting. Every quarter I do all hands meeting. And the undertone of the entire messaging is go out there, make mistakes, learn from them, or at least share with others what mistakes you've made. But don't feel shy of making mistakes.
I think the upshot of that is in a Japanese traditional work environment, mistakes are scolded in public.
Yes.
People are humiliated. The HR team get out the black book, and Greg's story made a mistake on,
and it affects your profession.
October 2023 or something, and when you get to a certain point of promotion, look, he made these mistakes.
Correct.
This guy made less, so we'll give it the other guy. So there's that aspect to it. But in this sort of environment where you're saying that, we encourage mistakes because we see it as a learning opportunity. How you treat the mistakes then becomes where the rubber meets the road, doesn't it? This is where
absolutely
people see, well, Dhruv said this, and a mistake came up from somebody, and this is how he treated it, and it's aligned with what he was talking to us about in terms of the culture and the philosophy. that's fine. It's when they don't match up. So how do you treat mistakes here?
I'm sure you'll identify with this, or at least you must have seen in offices. I don't know, I've heard this somewhere. They have bells. So in sales, when you get a new order, you ring the bell. I've tried to build an environment in the office that when you make a mistake, you ring the bell. Which means you're clearly, first of all, absolutely transparent that you made a mistake. And it takes steel to go up to the bell and say, knock, knock, I made a mistake. And when people come back to you and ask, what is it that you did? What is it that I can learn from it? And how can I help? I think you're building an extremely good team together. It also means that you're not willing to change. You're not willing to change what you believe in, because if you believe in, you'll go all after it. But there's no right path to the final destination. You do have to change gears at every given point of time. So it's okay to make mistake. It's more, for the want of a better word, more commando to go up and ring the bell, and then people come ask you, what did you do? Learn from it. And if you do it 3 times, you realize that making a mistake is not a bad thing. People are learning from it. They're freely giving you advice. So obviously you're learning from it yourself, and others are not doing it. And great teams, great businesses are run with teams that are absolutely fantastically working together. They're willing to forgive each other, hold each other's back, and also learn together. Again, goes back to sports. That's how sports is, right? The goalkeeper is never told, don't come to the midway through. He will come if the need be. So making mistakes is inherent.
And that is interesting. I guess there's also having the bell ringing when a mistake's made. That's part of it. I've never heard of that culture in sales. I've heard of that culture in terms of success. Made a deal, so ring the bell. But in terms of the other way of, okay, we found something that didn't work, or something we thought would work, it didn't go the way we planned, and we're going to note that. What are the things you found works well in building a culture in a company?
We touched upon this diversity. Clearly that helps. It's always good to have different mindsets come together. So diversity has always been on the top of my league. Authenticity. Authenticity.
Authenticity, okay.
Everyone has something that they believe in. There's a reason why they believe in. And coming to a professional life, you spend 2 decades of your personal life. There's clearly something you believe in. Being authentic is very important. Humility, of course, but also the urge and the hunger to learn. That's the culture. For example, generative AI is extremely prolific right now. Everyone's talking about generative AI. On your podcast, I'm happy to announce that the first generative AI course that somebody from Wipro Japan took was myself. The chain reaction. If the MD can do it and he tags his subordinates to do it, and then they tag their subordinates to it, everyone is learning. It's very easy for me to get into a meeting room and ask my subordinates or my leaders, how many of your teams have done Gen AI courses? But there could be somebody who will come and ask me, did you do it? It's very important for me to be the first one to do it. Lead by example. If you want others to do it first, you must do it. I could have taken about 2 days because of my schedule and now my rusty coding, but there were others who did it much faster. Lead by example, I think, is extremely important. But one must have to do it by themselves first before we ask from others, I believe. I think that builds a great culture in the company.
What other things work well in terms of building culture?
Asking what people want to do. What do you want to do and why do you want to do it? I'm putting what before the why here, but I sometimes will to ask, what do you want to do? Do you want to stay in Japan? I've seen, for example, I'll give you a live case where somebody came up to me and said, Dhruv, I've been in Japan for way too long, and this is a Japanese national. I want my children to learn English. That's not happening in Japan. Why do you want to do it? It's because whole of my life, I've been in Japan. Japanese love traveling. They're the best travelers, but do they live abroad? No. This person came up and said, I want my kids to be living abroad. I want them to be more globalized. Hence, I want them to learn English. It's not happening. How can you help? I said, go on, Wipro is a big company. Let me find you a place abroad, outside of Japan, where you can work. What they want to do and why they want to do it is a regular question that I keep asking. It's a part of our appraisal process. What do you want to do next year? But before that, why do you want to do it? Do you want to become a project manager? Do you want to continue doing the same thing? Then the question, why? Evolution is not happening. Is there something we're not providing you? Is there a worry that if you go into something new, your progression in the company will falter? Those are two regular questions that we keep asking. And in Wipro, we do our appraisals 2 times a year. I'm trying to do it now 3 times a year.
Oh, wow. I do it 2 times a year, and
It's a tough
lot
one.
of time.
It's a tough
How
one.
many people in Wipro in Japan?
We have about 1,500.
So it's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, yes.
And, Dhruv, if someone rang you up and said, hey, Dhruv, I've just been given this job in Tokyo or Japan, doesn't matter, somewhere in Japan. I've run the Japanese operation there, but I don't know anything about Japan. I don't know Japanese. What should I do? What would be some advice you give someone to be sent here as a leader, to be effective as a leader in Japan?
One thing that I've always asked even Wiproites who come from global, and I ask them to come to work for me, is before they come, I tell them, whatever worked outside will not work here. But whatever's worked outside will help you to make it work here. There's a difference between the two. You cannot come and deploy what happens outside of the world, do in Rome as Romans do. And therefore, those are great learnings, very useful ones. But in Japan, things are done a little differently. Can you change them? Yes. Are people wanting that change? Yes. But come with an open mind that everything in the world takes time. Longer or shorter, it does make a difference. So I asked them to come here with an open mind. One, which is use your learnings, but first, somebody said it, think of it by getting into my shoes. I've made an addition to that. Before you get into my shoes, you need to first take off your own shoes. You can't wear 2 shoes at the same time on the same foot.
That's that Zen story about the teacup pouring, where the Zen master
Exactly.
is pouring the tea into the cup. It's spilling over. The guy's saying, what are you doing? He said, you have to empty your mind before you can actually accept the Zen teaching. So similar idea.
And which is the Zen thing. It is so close to Japan. So that's one thing that I've always asked my peers, colleagues, subordinates, come with an extremely open mind, but put everything away to first absorb yourself. And that's why I have lived here so long. For me, early in my life in Shimpo, I had 8 months of complete immersion. And like I told you, when the sensei came in, the first word he said was konnichiwa. I just had to take off English. The first natural question, what does konnichiwa mean? But he didn't allow me to ask that question. It was just take your shoes off. There are great learnings here. That's one. 2, I think Japan is a very disciplined country. And discipline is extremely important in our life. Over-disciplining is also not good. Sometimes I see that.
Is India a disciplined country in the professional sense? I don't mean the mass of the population being disciplined, but I mean you're educated. You've got a big middle class these days of professionals.
Huge one, yes.
So I'm just wondering, is that also, is the cultural difference really still very huge, or is that middle class professional group also becoming more disciplined, and so the gap is not so large?
Coming from where I see it, when India was a third world country back in 1980s and the economy was still not out there, I don't know if you've read of this, but early 1990s, 2000, there's a lot of brain drain in India. A lot of engineers, much like myself, so I'm not a proud one to say so, left India to work in the United States and Europe. I'm the only one, by the way, from my university who came here, and I've stuck here for 20 years. But now a lot of Indians want to go back to India, which is a great thing. The brain drain has stopped. It also is a signature that India today is a more disciplined country, a more correct country, and a more growing country. Are we there yet? It's a relative question. You can look at it from any standpoint. Are we going to get there? Clearly we are. But then their destination is never defined. I mean, there's a thin line between discipline and over-disciplined. That's the thing that we speak about in Japan.
So what else, apart from these things, would be advice you'd give someone?
So the first was keep a very open mind.
Open mind, yeah.
To immerse yourself in the culture. And there's...
Or should they learn Japanese?
I shouldn't be saying this on your podcast, but there are some times that I do behave like the gaijin, which is I don't know to speak Japanese, but I actually do. Sometimes it's good to be innovative. Learning Japanese, language is one conduit to getting closer to a person. Communication. We all human beings have lived on communication. It's important.
It's also a doorway into the culture too, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if one is to learn Japanese, which I did in 8 months' time, and it's a tough one. You have the hiragana, the katakana, the kanji, and then the nuances. For me, what enabled me, because the construct of Hindi, subject, object, verb, and subject, verb, object is the same as Hindi. So it could be different for Italians or somewhere else. But language immersion, cultural immersion are the easiest conduits to wanting to fall in love with Japan, besides of the food. Two, and this is something that I have personally felt, is Japanese nationals are very open-hearted once you've opened the door. Until then, they're closed-hearted. But it's not because they want to be. It's deep-rooted culture. It's the way everything has been in Japan. And they're changing. So to be able to want to fall in love with the country, to want to work here, much like myself, for 2 decades. And I have this joke, I don't know if I should say this. I came here by Air India, and my wife tells me you'll go back by the grave. So there's no going back to India.
Well, I'll be on the same flight with you. I'm going back by the grave. I'm not going back. So this is it for me too. So if you're going to give your definition of leadership, Dhruv, what would that be?
For me, leadership is no longer leading teams. I may be the MD of this company. It's not about leading teams. It's about being that enzyme, that catalyst in making people achieve what they want to do. But I have a small correction to that. First, helping them discover why they want to do it and what they want to do. We go through our journeys of life, running behind great salaries, great positions. And then when we're about at 50, 60, we finally realize, what was it all worth? Did I have the right family time? Did I participate in my kids' sports day? And in the Western culture, these are things that people do. I think I follow those basic principles of my leadership. Coming back to your question, it's not about leading teams. It's about building trust, getting people to work together, getting people to have a belief together. And last but not the least, support each other. At the end of the day, we individuals, however economically strong or however economically challenged we may be, at the end of the day, we are human beings. Humility, compassion, sympathy, these are things that have connected us since ages. As long as you can approach that of an individual, they will sign up with you and you will sign up with them. So that's one. Two, and this is where I let my technical mind come in, always question the status quo. Why? Why should I do it this way? Why does it need to be done the 101st time this way? Isn't there another way to do this? Or why do you want to do this? And asking why question is not aggressive. It is not assertive. It's a very humble question to ask somebody why. I asked this to my boss as well. Why did you select me? You could have selected a lot of great Japanese professionals over here. You could have selected a large enterprise. He said he saw something in me which was very aligned to the geography, but also wanting to change it. And I have reasons to it. My kids live here. I have the why reason within. I want this to be a better place for them to live, an easier place for them to live, and a more, not an island country, but a more global country. So the why. And last but not the least, and I quote somebody says, when you reach the top of the mountain, look for the next mountain. Don't get satisfied. Look for the next higher mountain. Leadership for me is that. Once you finish climbing a mountain, look for your next challenge, and therefore look for the next challenge. Because at the end of the day, life is only about learning. It's evolution. How have you evolved yourself to be? Those are 3 basic principles that I like following in my life. And I ask my teams to follow if they like it too as well.
Well, thank you very much, Dhruv. That's a great point to wrap it up. Thank you very much. And join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.